Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be talking about 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 9, where Paul said, "For you remember, brethren, our labor and travail, for laboring night and day, because we would not be chargeable unto any of you, we preached unto you the gospel of God." What Paul is saying here is that he personally decided to not follow the typical model that God set up, whereby those doing ministry would not do any secular work and they would be fed by the church or the people of God, right? So if we read Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 1, God commanded that his ministers do no secular work. They would be fed by the tithe God commanded his people to give him. So it was his tithe. That is, God owns the tithe. And then because of course God cannot eat, corn or whatever, he allocated that to the Levites, but it was his tithe that he was giving. Okay, read Leviticus chapter 27 verse 32. God said, 10% of all your proceeds is mine. So that is the typical model. And the reason why God set it up this way is because if you make people to work, but at the same time expect them to do ministry, you're going to have that competition, right? With your secular work or there's social status that goes along with that. So that's a huge distraction. Okay, so having a business or job by the side is a distraction. It removes your focus from doing the ministerial work, because if you read the book of Leviticus, it was a tedious job. It was a job they had to do properly, and the last thing you wanted was where you have to now, in fact, at a time, the Levites, when the people were not giving the Levites their portions, the Levites simply abandoned the job and went to work, basically, to their own farms and so on. So, that, of course, this was much later, by the time Israel had sinned and they had been kicked out of the land. Now they had come back. They'd forgotten all those traditions. So that's what happens when you do not have those contributions. They now have to fend for themselves, and they just abandon the work. So to prevent that from happening, to prevent that as an excuse, right? Oh, I was too busy. No, to prevent that, okay, you guys are going to be fully dedicated. But another thing that you now have to do when you're being taken care of by other people is to now learn how to be content with what you're provided and not use the system God set up as an opportunity to exploit the people, because that was what ended up happening. If you read Ezekiel chapter 34, God spoke about how his shepherds, representing the spiritual and religious leaders who were heading his people, were exploiting the flock for their own gain. If you also read Jeremiah chapter 5 verses 26 to 27, you see the same thing. By the way, if you are enjoying this video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks. But another model, which Paul is saying he was using, is to simply take care of the financial burden himself. Now, this requires an extra capacity, because for the majority of people, if they go into secular work, they can't do ministry. They just focus on that and that's it. But if you have that mind where you can do both, then what Paul is saying can now work, where you can do ministry, but you can also have a secular job. Because in the real sense of things, they don't really compete, because God is everywhere. God is in your secular work. If you look carefully, you can see everything that the Bible talks about is happening there, whether it's envy or it's righteousness or whatever. So if you can do them together, then there is sometimes an advantage to what Paul is saying, because then you no longer have to sometimes pressure the flock or do all of these things or be content. You can just do your own thing. That pressure and that temptation from Satan, you can escape that. So there's a temptation you escape from being able to fund your own ministry or to fund yourself and your ministry. However, this is only a viable option when you can handle both. And like I said, it is not many people who can do it. right? Their secular work will become a distraction. You have to design your life in such a way where you are still your own boss and God is still in front before you can take this option and take charge of the finances of your own ministry. So that is not something you have to be coming to the flock about every time. Okay, yeah, you have to donate and so on. If you don't donate, then you're not doing the will of God. God is not going to. You don't go into that from that desperation or from that greed of wanting to get more free money. You can avoid that by this. But if you feel that you are not able to handle that, then the other method, the biblical method, is what is now recommended. You devote yourself, you have no secular work, and you are fed by the flock, but then you have to be content. Somebody like Jesus, for example, he never asked people to support him financially. But he was also content. That is to say, he was not saying that he had to live in a paid house. No, he could sleep under a tree. He could sleep in a cave, right? So then whatever money that was coming in, okay, he used it. He spent it, right? If you remember, Judas Iscariot had the money bag and so on. He had a money bag. People were contributing and donating and so on. But you never see Jesus Christ making that the forefront of his ministry. But there are some ministries where every service, it's about that. Donating and projects they want to launch, schemes they want to run, and how you need to, it's always fundraisings and stuff. You don't want that to happen because the church will now become about that. That was what the apostles avoided in Acts chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. The apostles avoided that diversion of the church to financial matters, right? By setting a committee that dealt with such things. So we want to avoid that distraction, right? And be able to focus on the ministry. So whichever method you take, funding your own or having the church fund it, you just have to avoid exploitation or distraction and just keep it as it should be. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about this. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. I will see you in tomorrow's video.